Hey everyone, this is Kara Crossweight-Brindle, and I am the Executive Director of Cata Lively, and we've had a lot of questions about how our tool, our online tool, works. So I'm here today to give you a demonstration and walk you through it so you know exactly what you're getting. All right, so this is your home screen of our tool. So it's a web-based tool, which means that as long as you have an internet connection, you can access everything you need in this system. Something to emphasize would be that you can load this on a phone, a tablet, a laptop, or a computer. It will modify the screen to cover everything so it looks nice and clean and streamlined. So for most people who come across our tool on their own, this is what they get first. And once you have a request to log in, you have your own email and your own license to use everything in the app. So there are 4 components we're going to look at today. The first of which is kind of the brainchild of the app, which is the risk assessment for suicide. So when you come in here, there are 2 options of how to access this. The first would be the radio button here in the middle that you're seeing on my screen, or you can go up to the top bar and make sure that you have access to the risk app from here. So we're going to go ahead and get started by having you take a look inside the assessment. Now, something our current users are talking to us about is the average user, the professional user in our system, is reporting it takes them about 20 minutes to do a thorough assessment with someone at risk. So with that being the average, some people are taking a lot less time, other people are taking a little more time. It just depends on familiarity with the content and your comfort level asking about suicide. A disclaimer, this tool is secondary to your clinical judgment, which means that you're going to use your best practice clinical judgment of what you've been trained in as a professional, and you're going to utilize that first. This is considered a secondary tool, which means that it's going to be secondary to everything that you assess, and it's supposed to be a walkthrough to help you feel more comfortable. The first thing you're noticing in the assessment itself is that we look at demographical data. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is we don't want the names or dates of birth of the client or student that's in crisis. We only want to have information that would be a risk factor. So recognizing that we have different risks for people in our LGBTQ+ population, or veterans have a higher risk, those are things that are represented in this first box. And so as we're going through, I'm going to go ahead and put in some information so you can see how this actually works. So let's go ahead and mark off some of the demographics of what they're saying. And we're going to have a 12-year-old, so of course they're not in a marriage at this point. And then what you notice, again, because we don't want this client's information, the assessor is you. And so for me, I'm just going to put in some initials, so if I had someone in my group practice also using this tool, we could figure out whose assessment was whose. Now, the mini mental status exam is something that's pretty familiar to the mental health community. It's meant to be a snapshot of how the person looks. If you are using this on a telehealth system, you might actually hide this by doing a not applicable, and it goes up into a nice clean space so you have more room to look at the rest of the app. But if they're in front of you, you might also go into this and start clicking things to say how they present in the room. So this would be, how they're presenting with you as you start the conversation around suicide. So I'm going to click a bunch of things just so you can get a good sense of how this works. And again, the mini mental status is something that the community already uses, and so it should be relatively familiar for those of you who have done mini mental status exams as part of intakes in mental health. So for our 12-year-old female, I'm just going to go ahead and put in some things of where she's at, just so you can kind of see how this works. Now, we intentionally kept things clean by having drop-down menus so that you could have the ability to capture information, and this will be a paper trail for you after the fact to show that you did a thorough and robust assessment. So, Section 2, Suicide Inquiry. This is where the Columbia Suicide Assessment, which was our inspiration for our tool, as well as SAMHSA's safety triage, came into play to create this dialogue. So when you're seeing in here is some information about suicide and asking direct questions about, do they have thoughts, yes or no? Have they experienced it in the present versus in the past? Things like that. Our community has asked for boxes to text different things or capture different things of what the client or student is saying. So those are here for you. And then what you're starting to notice as we go further into the assessment is there are examples of questions. What does it look like? What do you think of when you think of suicide? What does it mean for you? So we tried to give some examples of language for those of you who need some additional ideas of how to ask the question, but also some examples of what they might say or how they might respond. Ideation, very much like the Columbia as one of our inspirations. How often are they having thoughts? How easy or difficult are they to control? What's the duration? Let's say for our 12-year-old, as we demonstrate, her assessment process that she's had thoughts just in the last 48 hours. She has had some preparatory acts, including writing a suicide note, for example, and maybe she has timing and location figured out for herself. And this is where we could say what she's reporting. Location, home, things like that. Behaviors is something you're going to be talking to a person about of what's their suicide experience. So maybe they've engaged in non-suicidal self-injurious actions or self-harm. Express pain is what she's telling us for this particular example. And you're just seeing different things we've tracked in the community when it comes to risk factors. So a person who's visited the emergency department in the last month has a higher risk value than someone who hasn't. And that's just coming from the current research that we're tracking. Intent, they have expectations of following through, things like that. Let's go ahead and do a couple more clicks here. The third category is all about risk factors. This category could be pretty lengthy. We tried to make sure we condensed this and made this really clean for those that are using it on a phone. But does she have any prior attempts? No, this is her first experience. She does experience anxiety and hopelessness, for example. She has a family history of suicide. So again, you're clicking off things that are part of that suicide story, the conversation with you and your 12-year-old client. So anything that's not applicable, again, you can hide. You can also say they declined or it's unknown if you didn't get to ask the question. Psychiatric history, a new modification we've just recently put in is looking at current psychiatric experience versus past. So when it comes to someone endorsing that they have a mood disorder currently, like depression, as well as in the past, that's something you can mark here, as well as some trauma. So we're just going to click off things that would potentially fit her. And then she's saying, I have access to firearms, but let's say they're secured in a safe is part of your conversation. So clicking things off, and then protective factors to balance out all the risk. What do we got to protect them? So maybe they have an ability to cope with stress. Maybe they have a fear that's keeping them alive. Maybe they have a good friend as a social support, things like that. And for many people, it's their pets. So I'm going to go ahead and click those. Isolation and burden, how is she feeling when it comes to how connected or disconnected is she? So we're going to go ahead and put those in the middle ground for her family and her peers as an example here. And then what are her reasons to live and what are her reasons to die? And so this is a place where you could capture, hopefully, more of her language and what this looks like. So let's see if we put enough into the assessment to get a risk result. Submit here and have it load for you. So the results right now, based on the things that I clicked off into the app itself, we have a high risk result, and it broke down acute versus chronic. So acute would be the immediate risk factors that are happening in this moment versus things that are more long-term, diagnoses that have been around for a while for this person in their experience, things like that. So it's showing a high risk because of the factors that we endorse were mostly acute, 63%. In this purple box is the traditional way that we respond to suicide from the mental health community. So high risk would be things like hospitalization, higher level of care. We have moderate risk, and then low risk would be things like the crisis numbers, outpatient referrals, and so on. For those of you who are needing this as a paper trail, we also put in a box for next steps. So if you found that the risk result of this secondary tool was not complementary to your clinical judgment, you could make a note of why that is. What's the discrepancy? What were your next steps? For our school professionals, this is a place where they're documenting who was collaborating in that experience, who was contacting the guardian, was the principal involved, things of that nature. You can also print or download the assessment depending on what kind of internet browser you're using. So Google Chrome or Firefox or Safari, these are things that, depending on which one you load the app in, you can then have an option to download a PDF for your paper trail. From here, most of us as mental health clinicians are going to be considering a safety plan. That is a second piece to the tool that we have here today. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like. Hopefully it'll open here in the next window. So for our 12-year-old, our pseudo client that we're demonstrating today, you potentially would walk through this with her of how are we going to keep her safe. So for a lot of people, the questions in our safety plan should look familiar. It's inspired again by Stanley and Brown's safety plan, as well as SAMHSA's WRAP plan, which is Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And so potentially you would walk through this with your student or person in crisis and capture in their language what's going on for them. Who are their supports? What are the warning signs and triggers? What are some ideas to make their environment safe? We have some ideas for you if you want to endorse any of those as part of the plan. And then, of course, there's a place to have the next steps, the action steps. What's this person going to do first, second, and third? So for our 12-year-old in our demonstration, maybe part of her plan is reaching out to a support. Maybe it's taking a walk. Maybe it's petting her cat. Just things that are very concrete to help her feel safe and thus empowered. There's also places in the safety plan that allow you to show who collaborated on the safety plan. So this is important for our school folks that are doing this with the school officials as well as the guardians or parents. And then a place to say who is authorized to have a copy. Now, our bigger mental health agencies in town have asked us to have an email encrypted version where once you do the safety plan, you can actually send this off to collaborators. So maybe it's their primary care doctor, maybe it's their therapist outside of a school system. And so having a copy sent to those individuals could be very helpful in collaboration of care. So we've covered 2 of the 4 components. We have 2 left to look at today. The next one is our risk screener. Now this one is considered a short, very quick snapshot of the person's experience. So for a lot of our current users, they're reporting they use this between 2 formal assessments, or maybe they're using this initially before doing a more thorough assessment. So getting a snapshot of, do we need to go further into this, or do we have a low risk situation where we can move to a new intervention? So again, disclaimer, this is not meant to be diagnostic or create a treatment protocol. It's meant to be a snapshot of their experience. And so for a lot of you who have done suicide assessments, paper and pencil assessments, this will again look familiar. It's a question of, are they having thoughts? How often? What are the intent and behavior ideas here, as well as do they have plans and warning signs? And when you click into all of this, it will then produce a risk result again around each category. Do they have high risk because they have no protective factors? Or are they low risk because they have no intent? So these things are all weighted out in the app to help us do this and get them the support they need. Last but not least is our resource list, and this is part of our online tool as well. So when you click on the resource list, if you are engaging someone in crisis, this is an opportunity to find them the resources they might need. So the first thing to note is our resource list is about 1,025 resources currently. We've opened it up to the mental health community. We're asking for people to help us by putting their information in the directory so people can access this when using our tool. And our hope is that we can then have warm handoff situations or collaboration to help someone in need. So it's going to take a couple seconds here to load all those 1,023 resources. Hopefully it's going to work. There it goes. And the main thing to stress here is that we did try and find a way to filter or search for specific things. So because there's 1,025, 23, 25 in there currently, this is something we're checking every month to make sure they're current and accurate. But for those of you who are working with someone in crisis, it's going to be very handy to have to say, what else can we do to support you? So for our individual, she was high risk, so we're looking for something for a minor under 18. So our demonstration person was 12. And then for the cities, let's say we're looking at the Front Range and the metro area, and what you're noticing is it automatically selects all the cities that we have on record. Now, if you're looking for something specific, maybe you're looking for just Aurora and Denver, for example, or Commerce City, Aurora, and Denver. So these would be things that you could click off, and it's going to automatically start filtering our results. And let's say for this individual, because she's 12, we're also looking for low-cost options, or maybe even a Medicaid situation for her. So the more information you put in here, the more it's going to filter down based on what we have in our resource directory. And what you're seeing is for all ages, it's alphabetical order, and then for minors. And the more you filter, the less you have in the list. But let's say you have everything, it should then populate a lot more resources based on where they're located. So our labor of love in this technology is to keep the resource list up to date, to make sure it reflects every resource we can think of when it comes to hospitals, substance use, and mental health. And so we're going to try and keep that current for you as a potential user. So everything you have access to in the app are, again, in summary, the 4 things: the suicide assessment, the suicide screener, the resource directory, and the safety plan. And this is something that as a current user, you have access to as much or as little as you need every single month. And we hope that it is helpful to you. So our inspiration was to help individuals who are doing this great work and help them feel more comfortable, as well as helping the clients feel like they're being heard. So I hope that this tutorial was helpful to all of you that are considering our online tool. I know that suicide is a heavy topic and we want you to feel empowered as well as supporting your client to feel empowered. So please check this out. Let us know what questions you have, and I look forward to seeing you engage in this tool.